Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's having a great morning so far. It's pretty early out here, but I wanted to shoot a quick video talking about how to pray for an hour. It's something I've been getting asked a lot about lately, and I thought it would be a great time to throw a few thoughts up here for you guys. So here you go, my top 10 list on how you can pray for an hour. So the first thing you want to do if you would like to start to pray for a full hour is ask yourself, what is your why? Figure out your why. Why do you want to pray for an hour? Now for me, for years, I wanted to pray for an hour, but had such a hard time doing it. Usually a half an hour was kind of my sweet spot. And I couldn't figure out how can I get myself to pray for a full hour. Jesus clearly prayed sometimes for an entire night, for extended periods of time. He would get up early in the morning and pray by himself, often in an isolated location. When his disciples were keeping watch with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, he told them to keep watch with them and pray for an hour. When they couldn't do it and fell asleep, he said, "Couldn't you at least keep watch with me for 1 hour?" And so for us, praying for an hour ought to be something at least doable for us, if not something we regularly work into our schedule. So what is your why? Is it that you want to get closer to God? Is it that you want to deepen your prayer walk? Is it that you figured out that most of the spiritual greats in history were people who definitely prayed for extended periods of time, sometimes an hour or more every day? What is it for you that's motivating you? Figure that out, and that's going to motivate you during the times when you want to give up. The next key is find a regular time and place when you're going to do it and where you're going to do it. If you've always got the same place that you go to, you're going to immediately click into the frame of mind that you need to pray for a full hour. One of the biggest obstacles to praying for an hour, and in fact to prayer in general, is distractions. We get distracted. But if we've got a quiet place, an isolated place, just like Jesus had isolated, remote locations, solitary places where he prayed, then it's going to help you so much more. If you think you're going to pray for an hour with all kinds of craziness going on around you, there are ways to do it, but it's going to be so much more difficult. So I encourage you to find one place that you're going to go to, call it a prayer closet, call it your Gethsemane, where you're going to go and immediately snap into focus zone after you start to build that habit. In addition, you want to have a regular time of day when you pray. For a lot of people, that's going to be first thing in the morning. Now, almost first thing in the morning. You're going to get up. It's good to have about a half hour where you can just sort of become conscious and aware. In my experience, that helps. But for a lot of people, that's going to be early in the morning before a lot of people wake up. That's what Jesus did much of the time. For you, if you're a mother with young children, perhaps it's going to be during your child's first nap while they're going to sleep and you've got your first bit of extended quiet around the house. But whatever it is, find your time when it's going to be most peaceful and most conducive to focusing. The next tip I've got for how to pray for a full hour is be equipped. Have everything you need to pray for that full hour without interruptions. For me, that's often things like water so that I'm not going to get thirsty and have to get up and get a drink, some tissues, my Bible so that I can pray through some scriptures, my prayer list so that I've got a list of prayers that I'm going to pray through already with me. These are some things that I've got with me basically every time I have my hour of prayer time. If I don't have them, then I have to get up, go find those things. It's distracting, and the distractions is what you want to cut down on. The next tip is this. You don't have to talk the whole time, okay? You don't have to have an unending stream of words pouring forth from your mouth. In fact, that sounds a little bit more like the sort of babbling that Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 6. We don't necessarily need to have an unending stream of words unless you're just a super genius and you can do that every single time. For me, though, and for a lot of us, what we need is moments where we pause, where we stop to think about what am I praying about. That's fine. That is part of your prayer time. Meditation is completely okay. Think about what might be distracting you when you're praying. If there's something that's stopping you from speaking to God, then whatever that is, bring it back to God. Take every thought captive for Christ and pray about that thing. If it's a conflict, bring that conflict before God. If it's a bill that you're not sure how you're going to pay, bring that issue before God. Whatever it is, bring those distractions, even the ones that are kind of funny, bring those before God. Figure out, how is this something that God can actually help me with? And that's going to help us to direct our hearts again and again towards prayer. This next tip is huge. It's, in my opinion, almost an absolute must, practically speaking, when it comes to praying for an hour. It's this: have a prayer list. A prayer list. A list of things you want to ask God for, a list of things you want to even worship God for, a list of things you want to thank God for. These are all things you can put on your prayer list. You can write down prayer requests that people have given you. Have whatever it is you want to pray to God about on that prayer list. Now, there's one brother that I know about who has a prayer box where he deposits things in there that he wants to pray about, things that might be troubling him. That's a great idea. For me, I've got a list that I put down, and I make sure I bring that to my prayer time so that everything that I've wanted to pray about in the recent days and weeks is right there for me in the morning when I get up to pray. If I don't have that, I often find myself scratching my head wondering, what was that thing? No matter how pressing it is on my heart, sometimes I just forget what it is in the moment. So have your prayer list handy. The next tip is this: have some scriptures that you can pray through. That can be Psalms, that can be a whole variety of scriptures that you could use to pray through. It could be all the prayers of the Bible. You can pray through them one by one. Often what I did early on, as when I had trouble focusing, was I would start to pray, I would get as far as I could. And then once I ran out of material to pray about, or my brain this cogs just stopped turning, I would actually pull out a psalm and pray through that psalm. And then once I got done praying through that psalm, all of a sudden my heart would open up, my mind would open up, and I'd have all kinds of things to pray about after that. And then if I hit another roadblock, I would pray through another psalm. Have a list of psalms. There are 150 of them. That's plenty to pray through. And go through those psalms, praying through them one by one, as well as a list of prayers in the Bible that you find inspiring. As you pray through those prayers from spiritual men and women in the Bible, those things are going to train our hearts to pray the way that they prayed. This next tip is huge. What I do almost every time I pray is I start with the Lord's Prayer. This is how Jesus taught his disciples to pray. They asked him to teach him to pray. They asked him to do pretty much what we're asking God to do for us right now. And the answer Jesus had was this prayer. He gave them this prayer for a reason. Now, I pray that exact prayer, and then I continue my own prayer after that. That's how I do it. But I encourage you to start with the Lord's Prayer. It is something Jesus taught us to do. You don't have to be completely formulaic every time. But if you have that, it gives you a place to start, and we're using the tool that Jesus gave us to connect with the Father in prayer. This next one excites me. Sing. Sing to God during your prayer times. Not only is the book of Psalms a sort of prayer journal for us to pray through, but it's also a book of song where men like David, worshiped God in song and in prayer all at the same time. We see both things in the book of Psalms. This is clearly something that we can do as well. It doesn't matter if you're a good singer. It doesn't matter if you think you sound good or not. You can sing to God. What I've often done is I'll take my songbook, and every prayer time I'll sing a couple of those songs. That for me has been incredibly inspiring and enlivening. Now, some of you may be wondering why I didn't mention this one earlier, but it is the ACT formula for prayer. Okay, ACT stands for adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. Adoration, it's basically worshiping God, showing God how much you adore him. The second one is confession. We're confessing our sins before God. The third one, thanksgiving, we know what that is, thanking God for all the things that he's done for us. And the last one is supplication, which simply means we're supplicating God, we're asking God for things. This is where we get to the part that most of us spend most of our time praying about, which is all the stuff we want God to do for us, the ways in which we want him to work in our lives and in the lives of others. This structure has proven incredibly helpful for so many people. The reason I didn't mention it earlier is because many of us already know it, and it doesn't necessarily lead to us praying for an hour or more at a time. However, often what I'll do is I'll do everything that I've just said, and then I'll pull out the ACTS structure, and that helps me in incredible ways. Here's my last tip on how you can pray for an hour. Nature. Be out in nature. Maybe you can hear the birds chirping right now. There's something about being in creation that helps us to connect with the Creator. So maybe for you, that's going out into the woods somewhere. Maybe it's you've got a field that you'd like to pray in, or maybe a hilltop or even a mountaintop. I used to pray on a cliff. That was where I like to pray. So for you, find your spot, your closest spot in nature where you can connect with your Creator. It's a unique experience. Jesus did it. He had a spot in nature. Often he would go to a mountaintop, or he would go to Gethsemane, which was a garden, but still it was in nature. There are so many places where we can connect with God right in his creation. A prayer closet is good, an indoor room, a private room where you can pray. Maybe you call it your war room. That's great in the winter months when it gets really cold. Some people are diehard. They're out there even in the bitter cold. For me, it's early spring right now, and I'm quite cold already just being out here. My hands are kind of blocks of ice at this hour of the morning. But so maybe for you, this is just something you do when the weather's good. But either way, have a time of year or a time of day when you go out into nature, connect with the Creator, listen to the birds chirping, smell the fresh air. God actually designed us to be able to absorb these things, and it improves our health. And I think it also helps us to focus more in our time of prayer. So those are my thoughts on how you can pray for an hour. 10 tips on how you can pray for an hour. And here's the thing. Once you start praying for an hour, you are going to see your prayer life take off. I've seen it in my own prayer life, and now an hour doesn't even feel like enough. After I pray for that hour, I just want to keep praying and praying. And I think you're going to have the same exact experience as you devote yourself to being in prayer, watching in prayer before the Lord for an hour or more every day. Well, here's the sun finally coming up. I think it's time for me to get back to my day, but you guys have an awesome day, and I'm praying for you. Much love.